Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. It's Tuesday, the 7th of March, and we have Jessica Amir, market strategist from Saxo Capital Markets, as our guest today, coming out of Australia. Jessica, great to have you on the show as always.
Great to be back, Brian. Thank you.
Now, Jess, before we get your insights, we're going to take a look at how the regional markets have performed. But before that, we're going to take a look at how cryptocurrencies are trading. We've got Bitcoin, which is now at 22,463. It's up 0.54%. Ethereum is at 1,574.64. It's up 0.97%. Now, if you look at regional stock markets, we start close to home. It's a sea of green. It's the Straits Times Index in Singapore is up 0.55%. We've got Bursa Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur, which is up 0.36%. Shanghai is up 0.18%. The ASX All Ordinaries is up 0.51%. The Nikkei is up 0.35%. The Hang Seng is up 1.2%. And rounding up the numbers, we've got the Kospi, which is up 0.42%. Jess, it's a sea of green across the region. Tell us why.
Well, I guess we heard from one of the three major banks that are paving out a path this week. So the Reserve Bank of Australia was first chip off the block. Then we hear from the Bank of Canada and the Bank of Japan later this week. And today the RBA basically waved a flag saying that, not reading, not exactly in black and white, but reading between the lines, we could say that the RBA is probably going to slow down its rate hikes ahead. So now the futures markets are suggesting that the Reserve Bank of Australia will actually potentially stop hiking interest rates at 4%, and that is later this year in September, and then potentially cut in December. So I guess maybe this paints a picture for what we can expect later this week from Bank of Canada and the Bank of Japan, with a very different message there.
Now, Jess, while we're on Australia and before we move to other markets, isn't part of this influenced perhaps by the stresses that are happening in the mortgage market in Australia? Because the housing market is a very huge component of Australia's GDP.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess you could say a proxy for the consumer and the average Australian business. The Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Australia's biggest bank, previously reported their results a couple of months ago, and they announced a huge provision for bad debts, also delinquencies and bankruptcies as well. And this is because the average Australian is under duress, and this is likely to continue for some time. The RBA kind of alluded to that today, saying the lag effect of interest rate hikes has not been affected or has not really taken full effect on the average Australian. So this is a layer of concern, and this, I guess, is perhaps a reason why the RBA might be the first of the major banks to essentially take their foot off the gas.
Now, Jess, I want to move on to Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong market is outperforming global markets. What does this mean? Why is this happening, and what does this mean for the rest of Asia?
So we're seeing two cohorts of stocks. Firstly, construction, and also what we call at Saxo, the Chinese consumer and technology sector. So these two sectors are thriving just on the back of the COVID zero policy being abandoned, easing of restrictions, and we're seeing really a flurry of spending in the market. There's also an expectation at Saxo that we think that further stimulus will come from the central bank there. So we're seeing a huge amount of momentum go into this sector, and we think, as we put in our quarterly outlook, this will be a huge driver of growth for the next half year.
Jess, then still on Saxo, and what are the equity themes that you're looking at around the world right now?
Well, we're still overweight, or we still think that investors should be overweight to commodities and also defence. And if we step back and we take a big picture look at markets, we can see that defence sector of the market, or the defence basket, has actually performed the best. So it's up about 21% year on year. Now in here, in this basket, you've got stocks that you may not know, or perhaps you may have heard of, like Raytheon and Lockheed and Martin, and they supply defense. They also provide some cybersecurity to not only the US government, but many major economies around the world. And so their shares are doing considerably well, and this is supported by long life contracts that some of these companies have got in place with not only the US government, the Australian government, and various other Asian economies as well. So that is underpinning strength in these companies. And given that what NATO is also pushing for as well, 2% pledge of an economy's GDP to go towards defence, we think this is probably going to be a sector to watch for the next decade.
Now, Jess, final question. As we're at the start of the week, what is on the economic horizon that will move markets?
So today we've got we've got the Fed Chair Jerome Powell making a testimony over 2 days, 2 different speeches. So that's going to be closely watched. And then the next day, we've got a JOLTS report that's out on Wednesday. But the all-important data, Brian, will be Friday's non-farm payroll release. But all in all, we've got to step back and reflect that we have had hotter than expected reads come out of the US of late. Now, we are waiting to see if the February numbers are showing that jobs have slowed. So if we do see the jobs growth number slow as expected, this could be what markets are waiting for. And it might be a very pleasant surprise for equity markets, because if job numbers do fall, and that would typically result in the US dollar falling and bond yields retreating, and that would, of course, theoretically support equity markets higher. So this is a potential scenario to look out for on Friday.
Now, Jess, as always, thank you very much for your insights. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Brian.
Now, we've been speaking to Jessica Amir, market strategist at Saxo Capital Markets, on BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. I'm Brian Fernandez. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.